Paul Walker never expected that a simple cast dinner in Los Angeles would turn into the most humiliating night of his career. But the moment Dwayne Johnson laughed in his face in front of the entire Fast and Furious crew, Paul looked him dead in the eyes and said 7 words that made the whole restaurant fall silent. The restaurant sat tucked away on a quiet corner of Beverly Hills, the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide famous faces, and the waiters knew better than to ask for. It was supposed to be a celebration. The Fast and Furious cast had just wrapped 2 weeks of intense shooting, and the studio had arranged this dinner as a way to thank everyone for their hard work. Paul Walker arrived in a simple gray shirt and dark jeans, carrying a small gift bag for the director who had worked tirelessly to bring the story together. He was never the loudest person in the room. He preferred to listen, to watch, to let others take the spotlight while he sat back quietly. That was just who he was. But that night, something would shift inside him, something he had been holding back for years without ever telling anyone. Dwayne Johnson was already at the table when Paul walked in. He was surrounded by producers, assistants, and members of the crew, telling a story that had everyone laughing loudly. His voice filled the entire room, deep and commanding, the kind of voice that made people stop what they were doing just to listen to him speak. Paul smiled politely at the group, took his seat near the end of the table, and ordered a glass of water. He was not in the mood for drinking that night. He had a flight to catch in the early morning to visit his daughter Meadow, and he wanted to be clear-headed for her when he arrived. The dinner started smoothly enough. Plates were passed around the long wooden table. Jokes were shared between old friends. Old stories from previous shoots filled the warm evening air. But about an hour into the night, Dwayne turned his full attention to Paul. It started small, a casual comment about Paul being quiet all night, followed by a joke about him needing a bigger personality to survive in Hollywood long term. Paul smiled and let it slide. He had heard worse before in his career. He was used to being underestimated because of his calm nature and his gentle way of speaking. People often mistook his silence for weakness, his kindness for a lack of confidence. But Dwayne did not stop there that night. He kept pushing, his tone growing sharper and louder with every single sentence that left his mouth. He told the entire table that Paul was the luckiest man in the cast because he got roles based on his looks and absolutely nothing else. He said that if you stripped away the fancy cars and the action scenes, Paul would not survive a single serious role in this industry. He said that Paul had never truly proven himself as a real actor, that he was just another pretty face riding on the success of the Fast and Furious franchise. Some people at the table laughed, nervous and uncomfortable laughter that died quickly in their throats. Others looked down at their plates, pretending they did not hear any of it. The director shifted in his seat. The producer stopped chewing mid-bite. Paul set his fork down slowly and lifted his steady blue eyes to meet Dwayne's gaze across the table. The room seemed to shrink around them in that single moment. The waiters stopped moving between the tables. The conversations at nearby tables faded into a strange and heavy silence. Everyone could feel that something important was about to happen, something none of them would ever be able to forget. Dwayne smiled wider, thinking he had already won the exchange, thinking Paul would either laugh it off quietly or storm out of the room like most people did when he pushed them this far past. But Paul did neither of those things. He did not raise his voice even a little. He did not slam his hands down on the table in anger. He did not even blink as he stared back at the larger man. He simply leaned forward slightly in his chair, his eyes calm and steady and completely unshaken, and said 7 words that none of the people in that room would ever forget for the rest of their lives. I never needed a stage to shine. The silence that followed those 7 words was so heavy that it felt physical, pressing down on everyone in the restaurant like a thick, invisible blanket. Dwayne's wide smile faded slowly from his face. The director, who had been pretending to read the menu to avoid the conflict, slowly looked up with wide eyes. One of the producers coughed awkwardly into his napkin and cleared his throat. Paul did not explain himself further. He did not follow up with another insult or another sharp remark. He just picked up his glass of water with a steady hand, took a slow and quiet sip from it, and set it back down gently on the white tablecloth. Those 7 simple words did something that no shouting match ever could have done in that moment. They exposed the truth about both men in a single short sentence. Paul had spent his entire career staying humble, donating millions of dollars to charity without ever asking for a single ounce of credit, driving fans personally to hospitals when they could not afford the rides themselves, helping entire families rebuild their homes after devastating hurricanes struck. He did not need the spotlight to prove his worth, because his worth was already carved into the lives of the countless people he had quietly helped over the years. Dwayne Johnson, for all his size and power and fame and fortune, had just been reminded in front of everyone that volume is not the same thing as substance. The rest of the dinner passed in awkward and uncomfortable silence. A few brave people tried to restart the conversations, but the energy in the entire room had shifted completely. Paul finished his meal without rushing. He thanked the director for inviting him. He left a generous tip for the waiter. Then he walked out into the warm Los Angeles night without looking back even once. The next morning, Paul was sitting at the airport gate waiting to board his flight when his phone buzzed softly in his hand. It was a message from Dwayne Johnson. The message was short, only 3 sentences, but the weight of it was undeniable. Dwayne wrote that he owed Paul a real apology, that he had been completely wrong to speak to him that way in front of the crew, and that he hoped Paul could somehow find it in his heart to forgive him. Paul stared at the screen for a long, quiet moment, thinking about everything that had happened the night before. He thought about how easy it would have been to ignore the message, to hold on to the anger, to let the humiliation fester inside him, but that was simply not who Paul was at his core. He typed back 4 simple words: "We are good, brother." He pressed send, turned off his phone, and boarded the plane. If this story moved you even a little, take 1 second right now to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because we share untold stories like this, one every single week. Stories about the people behind the fame and the quiet moments that changed lives in ways most of us will never see. Drop a comment below and tell us what you would have done in Paul Walker's position that night. Would you have walked away, raised your voice, or found 7 quiet words of your own? Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that being quiet is not the same as being weak, and that real power often speaks in a whisper. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one. See you in the next one.